Good evening, everybody. There's not many of us this evening because everybody is out enjoying the sunshine, I expect. So we are going to do the webinar with Gail. If anybody can't stay for it all, it will be put up on the SEIB YouTube as well for anybody that wants to watch it again or to send anyone else to watch it. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Cheryl Johns. I run LiveryList and the Yard Owner Hub. It started as LiveryList on its own, a livery yard directory back in 2011. And then it gradually became a large resource for yard owners to the point that we brought out the Yard Owner Hub in 2021, had a lot of spare time over COVID, and it's now the UK's leading resource for yard owners, where we have templates, guidance, documents, everything on all aspects of practical and administrative yard management. I work alongside lots of equestrian charities, organisations and associations to help spread the word of best practice and to try to support yard owners to meet and understand this best practice and to try to help retain the value and standards in the livery industry. One of the big parts of that I do is supporting the procedures and requirements around biosecurity on livery yards. So when it comes to new arrivals, when it comes to preventing outbreaks of infectious disease, and we have lots of resources on that, but also it's good to hear from the horse's mouth, as it were. So this evening we have got Gail with us, and she's going to go into a bit more detail about biosecurity steps and measures that you can take on your yard to help protect yourself, your staff, the horses, and just to improve the standards and practices on the yard. So I shall hand over to Gail, just to say that there will be a follow-up email sent from SEIB afterwards with some useful links and information. And if you haven't already got one, a pen and paper might be handy. We may do a question and answer session at the end. Obviously, there's not many of us, but if you think of any questions during the conversation, you can either pop them in the chat function and we can come to them if we don't cover them already in the talk, or feel free to ask a question at the end. So I will hand over to Gail to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Gail. I'm founder of Ag Plus Biosecurity Specialists. It was a bit of a natural progression for me. I've always worked in the horse industry. All of my kids went through Pony Club. I was the Pony Club mum that took a knapsack sprayer and Jay's fluid and sprayed the stables before the kids went to camp. Everyone else thought I was mad. Knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have used Jay's fluid, but I was doing what I thought was the best at the time. And what we really want to be able to do is to help you as a livery yard reduce your risk. That's really important to us, that you have the skills to implement a biosecurity plan, have one written if you haven't already got one, and just generally be around to advise and educate, as well as offering a disinfecting service and using a specialist disinfectant.
Excellent. So we'll jump straight in. Biosecurity often seems like a scary word to a lot of yard owners, and more are getting on board. But from a basic point of view, Gail, could you just explain what biosecurity is and why yard owners should have it in their mind when they're thinking about the way that they manage their yard?
Yeah, biosecurity really is very simply broken down into the steps that we take to reduce the risk of infectious disease. Now, you'll be doing some of those already. You know, your horses will be vaccinated. That's a biosecurity procedure. And then the key things there are then, new arrivals, movements of horses, and general, what I would call good housekeeping, cleaning and disinfecting of equipment on a regular basis.
Who would be responsible overall for the biosecurity considerations on a yard? Would it depend on what type of yard you're at? For example, if you're a DIY yard or a full livery yard, who would generally be responsible for the biosecurity of a yard?
If it's a full livery yard, it's either the livery yard owner or manager, depending, who's in charge on that yard. And it's for them to be responsible of having a plan in place, having the equipment they need, a DEFRA approved disinfectant, which you should have in stock all the time. And they're the person that should be training staff, communicating with horse owners. Do-it-yourself livery yards are a little bit more difficult. They come in many shapes and forms. Some have somebody that is overseeing them, although people are doing their own horses, and some are really absent of somebody taking charge. And then it comes down to the individual horse owner, which can be really difficult. And we see this a lot in outbreaks. If there's no central person to oversee what's happening, we see disease spread through an entire yard instead of it being stopped early on.
So how easy, I suppose, regardless of what type of yard you're on, how easy is it to implement biosecurity measures in the day-to-day yard routine? And could you give some examples of just simple steps that, whether people are yard owners, yard managers, horse owners, just ways that they can take basic precautions in the course of their day-to-day routine of being on the yard?
Yeah, there's lots of little things you can do. Footfall, so the people that are on the yard, you know, knowing who is visiting, having perhaps a protocol in place for visitors. So, you know, horse owners are bringing friends in. You're visiting professionals. If you've got a big yard, you might have more than one farrier coming to the yard, physios, different vet surgeries. You know, it's finding out what protocols they've got in place. What can you do? Could you have a simple boot dip, a hand sanitizer? We're looking at things like shared equipment, so buckets, hay nets, these all need cleaning and disinfecting on a regular basis. New arrivals are really important, and a lot of people will say, we don't have room to quarantine a horse for 3 weeks as a new arrival on a yard. It's easier than people think it is, and that's something that we can talk about. But also, if you absolutely can't isolate a new arrival, then the simplest thing that you can do is take its temperature every day for 3 weeks. Because if you go back to the Strangles campaign and use the slogan hot before snot, the temperature rises in the 3 days before a horse becomes infectious, which gives you 3 days to catch a potential disease outbreak and isolate a horse that is potentially going to be poorly. It might seem time consuming, but actually it only really takes a couple of minutes to take a temperature and record it. And that is probably the single safest thing that you can do as a biosecurity measure for new arrivals on yards.
Yeah, when I worked with Red Wings, when they started the temperature testing as being one of the main focuses, it actually really surprised me. We did a survey with Red Wings, and the number of yard owners that actually didn't know how to take a horse's temperature properly or how to record horses' temperatures was quite astounding. So actually, it's good that Gail's mentioned it. For anybody that doesn't know how to actually record the temperature, there's some really good resources on the Strangles Hub as well on the Red Wings website, because I think the year that Red Wings started pushing the temperature testing, it was quite a learning curve, surprisingly, for a lot of yard owners. But that's some really good day-to-day tips, Gail. In your opinion, should each horse have its own separate grooming kit, feed buckets, water buckets, for example? On a lot of yards, obviously, there's a lot of communal things. So for example, the yard that I've been riding at recently, they just have a mass collection of grooming tools that are just used by anybody on any horse and have probably been in the same containers in the same condition for a long time. Do you think it's better if everybody has their own designated equipment?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, certainly grooming kits. That shouldn't be too difficult for every horse to have their own grooming kit. You hang them in one of those little PE bags outside the stable, and keep them separate and wash them and disinfect them regularly. Buckets, this is something that we try to be very practical and proactive with our yard owners. If you've got 40 horses on a livery yard, it's nigh on impossible for them to all have their own bucket. So then it comes down to washing those buckets and disinfecting them in between feeds. So we'd be looking at, and again, we always try to be very practical. You know, we understand the time implications of what we're asking people to do. So in an ideal world, we would ask you to scrub your bucket inside and out after every feed and disinfect it inside and out. and then turn it upside down to dry, and don't stack them wet. Now, in reality, that might not be a possibility. So what we're asking our yard owners to do is to rinse the residue feed off of the buckets for one of the feeds a day, and then the second feed a day, to scrub those buckets inside and out and spray them with disinfectant. It's halving the workload, but it's also reducing your risk. We know practically that staff are up against it. People are struggling to find staff these days, and you've got busy yards, busy days, and it probably doesn't seem like a priority at the time, but it's actually really important. Buckets are a big point of cross-contamination.
Yeah, I think that's one thing actually that kind of puts yard owners off of taking steps like that, because they think that it will be time consuming either for them or their staff. Outside of feed buckets, so some people might not know this, and I don't think I know the answer either, but what is the limit of things that can be disinfected? So obviously you can disinfect grooming kits. Can people disinfect things like girths or leather products?
Yes, there's absolutely no limit to disinfecting. The disinfectant that we use, for instance, Endosan, can go in the washing machine with numbness, rugs, your work clothes. It can be used in boot dips. We can disinfect your grooming kits. Hay nets. Hay nets is a big one. In an ideal world, again, you would take each hay net out of each stable, go and fill it and put it back again. But quite frankly, having been a yard manager, I'd kill anybody who did that, because time-wise, it just takes too long. You are going to collect all of the hay nets in, fill them all up, and they're going to end up in different stables. So these are items that need submerging in disinfectant on a regular basis. And certainly our disinfectant, which fizzes when it hits pathogens, creates quite a show when you put the hay nets in a skip bucket full of disinfectant. And then you just hang them over a gate to dry. There's no residue, so you don't need to rinse them. They're completely safe to use for hay afterwards. But mostly people who've thought about cleaning and disinfecting equipment have never thought about doing their hay nets. And they are shared quite a lot. So, but yes, you can certainly clean your tack, spray girths if you've got shared equipment between horses, bridle dip buckets if you've got to share bits and bridles. Yeah, literally anything. Riders' boots, particularly on race yards, visiting jockeys, for instance, going from yard to yard, they're really good at spreading ringworm. So riders' boots is another area that needs looking at if you've got visiting riders, in particular if they're not staying to riding their own horses. Again, it's something that's often overlooked.
Yeah, every day's a school day. I'd never thought about disinfecting a hay net. And you said that, I was like, it's true, actually. I've seen some grotty hay nets over the years.
Well, they've got saliva, they've got warm, damp breath. You might have been steaming or soaking hay, so they're absolutely absorbing so much organic matter that they are the breeding ground for pathogens.
Yeah, nasty. So when you say about disinfecting things regularly, so say, for example, if we're talking about things like hay nets or grooming kits, things that are more commonly in use, what would you class as regularly when it comes to disinfecting them to be a good level of hygiene?
So that's a slightly how long's a piece of string question. So grooming kits, for instance, really it depends how often they're getting what I would call properly dirty. Then they want cleaning and disinfecting, and that again depends whether your horse is going out during the day and getting absolutely filthy, and then you're grooming, so then you might need to do them more regularly. An ideal scenario would be to do these things in a rota, and that we would very much but work with a yard on what is best practice for them, because it has to be manageable. It's no good to me saying to you, well, you must clean and disinfect your brushes once a week or every time you use them, because if that's not practical, then it's not going to happen. So we would sit with the yard owner and staff and work out what is feasible for them, because anything that they're doing is better than doing nothing. And then what we find is, as our relationships with them build, and as they start to get these protocols in place and they become second nature, 2 minutes here and 5 minutes there, once a week, once a month, then they're happier to build on those over time, and we can bring things either more frequently, or we can include more things that we feel that they should be doing. It's about not overloading people to start with.
Yeah, that's definitely the best way to do it, like the way that you do it. As you say, it's all very good having generic information, but everything's going to change depending on the yard and what setup it is and what their routine is anyway. So if a yard owner at the minute thinks they don't have any of this in place, they don't think about disinfecting anything, they might give the yard a good clean annually. What equipment does a yard need to have in place if they want to be able to do the most basic of cleaning and disinfecting things, sort of following good practice advice?
So if we're looking at equipment, grooming brushes, mucking out tools, buckets, that kind of thing, a detergent of some description, hot soapy water is definitely the way to go, followed up by disinfecting. So you would have, depending on the size of the yard, you might buy a ready to use disinfectant like we do a ready to use for our Endosan, or you might buy a concentrate that you can dilute as you need it. It's about having things in stock so that you can use them when you either got time, or if you've got a protocol in place, and that you're doing hay nets once a month or grooming brushes once a week, that you've got the equipment there to do that. On a wider scale, we're working with livery yards and other yards now to have what we call a disinfectant station. So they have a place that particularly staff can go to, that not only has disinfectant and hand sanitizer and a thermometer, but has some key information as well. So just a basic outline of what the key symptoms of infectious diseases are, a temperature, pulse and respiration chart so they can immediately record, various bits and pieces like that. It might include their full biosecurity policy if they've got one, but we always think of it in terms of, if as the yard owner or the yard manager you were away for the day and for some reason the youngest or the most inexperienced member of staff was left alone on the yard, you would hope not, but occasionally these things happen, would they be able to implement a biosecurity policy? Would they know what to do should they discover that a horse is ill and is likely to have an infectious disease? Now, you would hope in this day and age they would always be able to get hold of you by telephone, but we also know that we have times where there's no reception, or you might be jumping around a cross-country course yourself, so there's going to be a period of time where they can't access you. And in the case of an infectious disease outbreak, the more that we do quickly, the less spread that we get. So it's making sure that all of the staff on the yard are empowered, they're trained, they understand, and that they can go to a point and get what they need.
It's really good. I think it's important to have the open lines of communication, like you say, and the signage and the information, because it's all very well a yard owner in their head, which a lot of yard owners have it, knowing what it is that they do and what they would like to achieve, but it's no good if they don't communicate it to their staff, or in some cases the liveries, for example, if they've got specific procedures if people are going off to events. And I think, like you said, that's a really good thing, for example, to cover in staff training, or to put in staff handbooks, or even to put on the Yard Owner Hub, for example. We have an actual handbook for liveries, which is all the things that wouldn't go in a contract. So it would be very easy for yard owners to include in that a page on, these are the steps that we go to protect from a biosecurity point of view. And these are the steps that we would like you to go to from a biosecurity point of view.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree. Having that open line of communication, because it's all very well expecting somebody to know your expectations, but not if you've never explained it to them, and not just the how, but also the why as well. When it comes to the disinfectant, the method of lots of things, so some things are obvious, obviously, like foot dips, hand sanitizer, putting things in the washing machine with a dose of disinfectant in there. But when it comes to actually cleaning the yard, what do you find is the best process? So if somebody wanted to disinfect the whole yard, for example, they've taken over or rented a new yard and they want to start afresh and make sure everything's clean, what would you do as a service that you provide that goes in and makes sure that that is absolutely spotless for them to start afresh?
Yeah, so firstly, we would always advise that, for instance, if you're taking over a new yard, that it's cleaned and disinfected. Now, we can just disinfect, and the disinfectant that we use, Endosan, works in really high levels of organic matter, but you're always going to get a much better protection if you've cleaned and disinfected. It's one of those things, if you just clean, you're not going to kill all the pathogens, and our disinfectant is very good, and it will kill 99.999% of pathogens. But what people need to understand about any disinfectant is, if there's organic matter on the walls, so I don't know, some nice big poo stain on the back wall, we will be killing the pathogens on that. However, because it's organic matter, it will regrow pathogens. So it's better if we can remove them first. So in the case of taking on a new yard, you'd want to be having it cleaned. Hopefully, whoever you're renting it from, unless you're buying, will be doing that between clients anyway. And then you would have it disinfected when you arrive. So we come out with high pressure vapor machines and our specialist disinfectant, and we disinfect stable walls, doors, floors, horse walkers, horse boxes, feed rooms, tack rooms. And we're having a really good success rate with the disinfectant. We've had a lot of testing done on the disinfectant, including on live samples of strangles at the Irish Equine Centre, which gives us the best possible comparison as to how it works in the real world by using a live sample rather than something manufactured in a petri dish. That gives us the best case scenario when we're out and about. So we've had the extra testing done.
So when someone's in the market for disinfectant, like anything, there's some that are good and some that are not so good. So if somebody's looking online, or if they're going into their local agricultural store, if they're looking for a disinfectant that's safe to use on the yard, what is it that they actually need to be looking for in terms of what that contains, or any particular marks or accreditations that they have?
So any disinfectant that you use should be on the DEFRA approved disinfectant list. And this means that it's been tested. There's a column, there's several columns. I mean, it'll say swine flu and foot and mouth and all the rest of it on this DEFRA list for each disinfectant. And if it says not approved, it just means it hasn't been sent in for testing for that thing. But what you're looking at is the general orders column. And this is the column that DEFRA have tested that disinfectant to prove that it will kill the majority of diseases. So they've specified a few: bird flu, swine fever, foot and mouth, but all of the others are lumped in together under general orders. So your disinfectant should be on that list. And then from there, really, you want to know what is it going to kill, because they're not all created equal. Does it do bacteria? Does it do all bacteria, or does it do a selection of them? Viruses, again, does it do all viruses or a small selection of them? Fungus, mold. A lot of disinfectants are not sporicides. So, for instance, ringworm has a spore stage, which you need to know that a disinfectant is going to kill that. Ours goes a little bit further. It does mycobacterium, which you would find in an operating theatre. And it's also an algaecide because it's a human grade water treatment product as well. It's safe to drink in its diluted form. So you're looking for a broad spectrum disinfectant that covers as many diseases as possible. And then other than that, really, you need to be looking at, is it harmful to you or your horse's health or your staff's health? And, environmentally wise, I think now there are disinfectants like ours on the market that are organic and biodegradable, but have this powerful testing behind them that we know kills the things that we say it kills. We don't need to use a disinfectant anymore that is harmful to the environment. And everybody who has a disinfectant on a yard should have a copy of the safety data sheet. All disinfectants have them. And these basically tell you things like how it should be stored, whether it's harmful to yours or your staff's or the horse's health. And from a health and safety executive perspective, as businesses, you should have a printed out copy in your office or tack room or wherever your staff have access to, so that should anything go wrong, you can take a copy of that safety data sheet with you to the hospital. And that is a requirement by law, which most people don't realise.
No, they just buy it and it gets put in the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's like a lot of things that if you try and buy, there's just a million different options for people. So that's a really good explanation for people to know. And it's like most things, it's really important not just to base what they're buying on price, because obviously the cheaper ones are likely to not be as effective and have the same sort of sciencey business behind them. So they might as well just do it with nothing at the end of the day. What I've heard before from some yard owners is saying that they worry if they're going to disinfect the yard, the stables can't be used for X amount of time. Is that the case, or can you, obviously there's going to be a drying period when you disinfect anything, but is there any sort of safety precaution time that you should not use anything after you've disinfected it?
That's one of the things to look at when you choose a disinfectant. So again, some disinfectants have what we call lead times on them, where horses aren't allowed back in the stables, and neither are staff. And certainly those are the ones that potentially I would imagine you'd be wanting to avoid. So our Endosan doesn't have a lead time. You can spray the stable and put the horse straight back in. What we advise is, because ours fizzes when it hits pathogens, if we're getting a lot of fizz, we might say to you, oh, we'll leave the horse out for 5 minutes, allow the disinfectant to do its job, rather than them going in and knocking it off the wall while it's still at the fizzing stage. But yes, certainly some of the chemicals in some of the disinfectants are not very friendly, and there are lead times where horses need to stay out, particularly if you've got internal stabling and it sort of collects in a bit of a cloud. And again, that's something that you should be checking if you're using a disinfectant, and that's why you have the safety data sheets, because it will tell you on there.
And you do the cleaning and disinfecting of water troughs as well, which again, much like hay nets, is probably something that a lot of people don't think of. So again, presumably as long as you're using a safe one, then you can reinstate the horse trough with water as soon as it's been cleaned.
Yeah, so our Endosan water treatment, we would advise you'd empty the trough, scrub it clean, refill it, add the correct dosage, which obviously we would talk you through. We've got a document that explains how to do it, but I'm always happy to chat. I'll work it out for you if it's easier. And you fill the water trough up with the Endosan in the water, and that is drinkable at the correct dose. Now, what is really important to understand is that any water treatment product has a safe drinking limit. And what we do is we provide our clients with test strips. So, for instance, here at home, I test strips our troughs twice a week. And there's little colour comes up on the end of the test strip which matches the pot. and it tells you what ppm, parts per million, is in the water. We're looking at a 50 ppm, which is a turquoise colour, and that allows me to maintain the correct dosage in that tank all the time. And so last summer, the horses went out towards the end of February. We're on clay, so they don't always get to go out in the winter. And I did clean the troughs twice, but I'll tell you for why. I didn't have to clean them because the water was going green. When the horses came back in October, they wouldn't have needed changing at all, bar Jack came up the field and slid to a halt and filled one full of soil. So it had to be emptied. And then unfortunately, although ours is out in the open, it does get leaves in the autumn. So there's the scenario where the debris needs removing, but the water was still crystal clear. Now, obviously, that's better for your horses from a health perspective, but also because it means that should a horse come along with an illness, an infectious disease of some description like strangles, and drink from that water trough, then the endosan is going to kill that in the water before the next horse comes along and drinks. So water, again, is a huge point of cross-contamination, particularly in disease outbreak. And what we see a lot of, and working with the vets, what the vets will tell you is that often that's the weak link, that, you know, people have scrubbed buildings from top to bottom, they've washed all the equipment, and then they randomly have another cycle of a strangles outbreak and don't know where it's come from. And it's because they've got shared water troughs, or they didn't think about emptying a water trough when a horse was diagnosed as being infectious, and refilling it, cleaning it and refilling it before the horses went back out, because something like strangles can live in water for up to 6 weeks. So you know, it is an area of cross-contamination.
I've heard that a few times as well, especially when you've got strangles carriers, so ones that just have strangles in their system without any outshowing symptoms. And as you say, you can get over a strangles outbreak, where you can have a new horse come onto the yard that's a carrier, and it only takes them just dropping a tiny drip of something unsavory into the water, and then that's it, all the horses are drinking it. So yeah, that again, disinfecting water troughs was not anything that I'd ever thought of until I started speaking to you about biosecurity. So aside from the disinfectant aspect of things, what are other good biosecurity steps that yard owners can take, or that they can get their liveries and staff to take, when it comes to storing things in feed rooms, for example, or in tack rooms?
Yeah, so feed rooms, obviously, they need to be kept as clean as your kitchen. They should be light, well ventilated. We often find actually that feed rooms are probably the darkest room on the yard, with not such good ventilation and no light. And this isn't great because this creates damp. And damp, again, is where pathogens lurk, and particularly that attracts mold, which we don't want near our feed at all. So good sweeping, vermin control. You need to have separate coloured buckets for medications. So at home we use a purple bucket, a purple scoop, and a purple stirrer for if anything's on a medication. And we use red if, well, never had to use them yet. I'm touching wood on the table here. We would use red. We've got a set of red buckets for if we had an infectious disease outbreak. And, you know, it's about making sure that feed boards on yards are up to date, that you have trained your staff on a protocol for who is administering medications. You might not want all of your staff to do it, where the medications are being kept. Very important to keep records of them. Again, it would be good to keep records of the feeds that you're using and the batch numbers. Occasionally things go wrong and batches get recalled. You know, you should know what batch you've had through your feed room. It all comes back down to good housekeeping. You know, my grandmother ran a riding school many years ago, and on a Sunday afternoon. The horses had the afternoon off and everything was washed, cleaned and disinfected. We don't tend to work so much like that now because we're a 7-day-a-week society. So it's more difficult to, give an afternoon or a day where that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to strip everything and clean it and disinfect it, which is why it's quite important to have a routine for your yard that includes those, so that you're doing these jobs regularly but not necessarily all at the same time, because that's not great staff wise.
And when it comes to new arrivals on yards, switching subject a bit now, is that something that you can help people come up with as well? So can you help them come up with a biosecurity plan when it comes to procedures when they have new arrivals, or when they have people going to and fro from events and schooling and competitions and such like?
Yes, definitely. We come out and do yard assessments. So we can do these in two ways. We can do what I would call a simple yard assessment, come out and have a walk and a talk, look at the layout of the yard, talk about what you've got in place already, the type of horses and clientele that you've got, because that makes a big difference. I mean, a lot of yards, horses don't go very far, and then other yards, you've got them competing abroad. So it's different for everybody. And then we can go from there to doing a full biosecurity plan. Now, for instance, if you're a British Horse Society approved yard, you might have a biosecurity plan, but I can pretty much guarantee it's a generic one, that it doesn't necessarily fit the layout of your yard. And we can come up with the best place for you to use for quarantine or isolation. And you might think that you absolutely don't have anywhere to do that, but it's very rare that we don't find a space that would be suitable, even if it means that you can only do it by putting a horse on the end of a row and leaving a stable as a gap and then cordoning that off. That's what we have to do at home. Eve had a new horse last autumn, Margaret, love her. And we have a separate paddock, which the end stable is next to. So she had that paddock, the end stable. We had cones out with rope around them, big sign on her top door. And then Casper, the little pony next door, had to live out for 3 weeks, which he really didn't mind as a New Forest. And that gave us a buffer zone, a break. So the advice is that you have a minimum of 10 feet. Now, obviously, if it's an airborne disease, that's probably not enough, but you're doing as much as you can. And again, I've always got to reiterate, taking temperatures. That's the single most important thing that you can be doing.
Yeah, temperature testing is definitely a big key. For people that are traveling off of the yard, that are used, so this is going to be a bit of a two-pronged question. For people that are firstly using transport, whether it's their own, let's stay with transport first. So if people are using transport, if it's their own, should they be disinfecting it every time? And if they're using hired transport, should they be expecting those transporters to be disinfecting their transport between different jobs for the horses?
Yeah, so firstly, if you talk about your own transport, we'd advise a deep clean twice a year, and then to disinfect in between each use. And the reason for that is horse boxes and trailers, you've got them tied up to a panel in effect, where you have the warm breath, and then you've got hay, which is providing the organic matter, and that is then building up on that surface, and breeding pathogens, and we get a lot of fizz across the tie-up surface of horse boxes in particular. And what again we'll say to people is, yes, ideally we'd like you to disinfect the whole of the inside of your horse box in between each use, and I get eye roll and a bit of a groan, but if you can only do the panel that they're tied up against, then you're helping yourself, because travel is stressful. Even if they enjoy being out and about, it's stressful, and it lowers the immune system, which linked with probably getting a little bit warmer than average inside a horse box, and then a little bit dehydrated, is going to allow the pathogens in much more easily. So it's an area that needs to be kept clean. And the other thing that we get asked quite a lot is sharing. We've done it when the kids were smaller. Eve still does it now when she'll pick up a friend and go somewhere. And I absolutely don't want to stop that. That's fun. That's what we do it for. Share a picnic, take your horses out together, have a nice day. But you need to disinfect your horse spots before and after you've had another horse in it. And hopefully you've got the kind of friendships that if you are taking a horse out and about of somebody else's, that a simple conversation beforehand shouldn't offend anybody. Is your horse okay? Any signs of illness before we head off? Mine's fine. Or the other one is if you're picking up a friend who's on a big livery yard and you say you're on a private yard, it's just say as well, are all the horses on the yard okay? It shouldn't offend anybody if you ask a question like that, and then just back that up with your disinfecting. Transporters are a difficult one. There's two kind of, not types, but there's two ways people will do it with the transports. You've got the shared loads where they're picking up horse after horse after horse, which is then more difficult because you've got strange horses all up against each other, and if somebody's got something, then it's going to be difficult to stop. But if they disinfect at the end of the day, if they wash out and disinfect at the end of the day before they go on the next day to pick up shared loads, then at least the horses the following day aren't going to pick anything up. And then you've got quite a few of the transport companies now refuse to do shared loads. And again, you're hoping that they're washing out and disinfecting at the end of the day. And again, they should never mind you asking what their biosecurity protocol is. And if they do, then frankly, don't use them. And a lot of the smaller companies that we work with now are disinfecting in between every single horse, as well as washing out and disinfecting at the end of the day. And it's a 2-minute job. You get yourself a little knapsack sprayer, you put our diluted endosan in, it takes 5 minutes at the most, even in a big horse box, to whiz around with a disinfectant, just to protect everybody.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because a lot of yard owners that don't have procedures for new arrivals, I always see on the yard owner group that I run, lots of people saying that they will have horses coming over from Europe or coming from Ireland, or that are moving from one end of the country to the other, often on shared loads or with transporters, and it's almost like they don't kind of think of that aspect, the transport aspect, and who else has been in that lorry, or what other horses are on that load, or where they might have come from. So again, that reiterates that it's really good practice to try and isolate as best as possible anything that comes on the yard.
Cheryl, I think for me, so if you've got a horse coming in from a livery yard down the road, it happens, people move for various reasons, I'd be less concerned about you not isolating as long as you're taking temperatures. But if you've got something that has travelled on a big transporter shared load and come from abroad, Ireland, Europe, wherever, those are the ones that we really, really need in 3 weeks isolation. Those are the ones that potentially are going to cause you a problem.
Yeah, I always think actually a lot of, not necessarily the yard owners, but quite often when they get the comeback, it's from the liveries, because they think it's going to cost money, or it's going to be a hassle, or their horse has got to be isolated. But actually, it's getting across that it's actually taking biosecurity steps, however minor or extreme, is actually protecting everybody on the yard. So it's protecting the yard and its business, it's protecting the horses, it's protecting the livery clients from an outbreak. It's kind of in everyone's interest, really. But another question I'll ask is, I always find this quite an interesting point. I remember when I first was working with Red Wings, when they very first launched the Stamp Out Strangles pledge back in 2018. I was talking to a lady, I think we went to Your Horse Live to launch it, and I was talking to a lady and I said to her about, what biosecurity, and she said, oh, we'll never have an infectious disease on our yard because our horses don't go anywhere, they're all retired. And I said to her, yeah, but surely, do you not have the farrier come in or the vet come in? And it was like you suddenly saw it dawn on her face that actually you've got a farrier coming into the yard that could have been and seen 10 or 20 other horses if your appointment's late in the day. And we all know that how much horses love to rub their noses on the back of the farrier while they're doing their feet. And I said to her, do you not think that your horse is rubbing its nose on however many other horses' noses? And you could just see like, oh yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And I said to her, just because your horses don't go off the yard doesn't mean that they're not at a risk of cross-contamination. So I've been talking again a lot with Red Wings about this because when we did a lot of work with Jonathan from Ive's Equestrian Centre last year, one of his issues that he had was that there really is a lack of just sort of common sense around biosecurity when it comes to service providers, right from freelance grooms to physios to farriers to dentists, even up to vets. So what would you say are a good basic protocols that yard owners should think of for anyone that they've got coming on the yard, whether it's a service provider or just a friend or family member of a livery?
Yeah, so again, it's about being able to have honest discussions with your visiting professionals. So, at home, we've been using the same farrier for a while. We've had the same physio for years and the same riding instructor for my daughter for years. And nobody is offended by me saying, please could you change your coat? If you're coming from somewhere else where you've been teaching and you've touched horses or handled them for some reason, could you change your coat, wash your hands and disinfect your boots before you come? And then we also have that available here should they arrive at us for some reason not having been able to do that. I mean, I go from yard to yard during the day, and all of my equipment is disinfected before it's put back in the car. I disinfect my boots. I wouldn't wear the same coat from yard to yard, and I wash my hands. And I am literally stood in disinfectant all day, so there's probably pretty much nothing on my clothing, but I wouldn't ever risk it. It's good protocol. And my daughter, she works freelance. We've managed to persuade her that the car drove instead of the floor drove, what girls' bedrooms are like, can actually be amalgamated into boxes. And she is lucky in that the yards that she works at have got branded clothing. So she's got 3 or 4 boxes in the boot of her car with each client's branded clothing in, which means that she can just whip a coat off, put it back in the box and get the next one out, having washed her hands. And she keeps a spray bottle in her car. As a freelancer, it's just a 2-minute job. It then all goes in the washing machine with disinfectant, and not only is she reducing cross-contamination risk from yard to yard, but she's coming home to her horses. So the last thing that any of us want is for her to bring something back, or for me to go to a yard that's got an outbreak and then bring it home. So for instance, if I go to a yard that has an outbreak, although everything's disinfected, I would wear an overall, I stand in a bin bag, that all comes down into the bin bag, gets tied up, and I go straight in the house and have a shower. I don't touch ours at all until I've had a shower and everything's gone in the washing machine. It's a couple of minutes. It's a little bit of planning and forethought. We actually did a CPD day for farriers in Newmarket, and mostly we were talking about how the environment affects hoof health. But at the end of it, I did a piece on biosecurity. And what we did was we created a map with our farrier, and we pegged on it his stops for the day and what those yards were, Now, some were livery yards where you had 1 or 2 horses. Some were private clients where you might have had 4 horses. And then, you know, he might have gone to a lady with a retired 40-year-old pony and no biosecurity in between. He does. But, you know, this is what the scenario we were talking about on the CPD. And to a degree, the horses that are competing and the horses on the livery yards have probably got a certain amount of resistance to some of these infectious diseases, certainly at a very mild level. But what nobody stopped to think about, really, which was an eye-opener for all of them, was that the 40-year-old retired pony that they adore going to see, you know, and they get a nice cup of tea and a bacon sandwich or a piece of cake because the lady adores the pony and then adores people coming to do its feet or whatever. That's the pony that's going to, unfortunately, not make it through an infectious disease outbreak. And I don't think any of them had ever really thought about that. They might have thought about they might be cross-contaminating from yard to yard, but they hadn't stopped to think about the types of clients that we're seeing. And we also then said to them, you know, it might not be the best way route-wise, as in road-wise, but could you do your clients in terms of, let's do the 40-year-old pony first, where we start the day in clean clothes, and then move through the clients till you end up on the sales livery yard where there's 4 horses going through the box every month, you know, and just work that into their planning a little bit as well. And I think that can be said the same for any visiting professional, is, you know, is to just think about where they're going and what they're doing beforehand.
Yeah, I've always recommended that if people have got old or vulnerable horses or ponies, or actually if they're just really conscious of biosecurity, that whether it's a farriers or vets or whatever, you should always try to have an appointment earlier in the day, because obviously the earlier in the day you are, the less you're along the line of succession of cross-contamination that's there by the end of the day. But yeah, it's small things like that that a lot of yard owners don't think about, that are actually, it's a very simple step and it doesn't cost anything to ask, oh, can I have an earlier appointment? Or, you know, can you make sure that you change your jumper or your top, or do you disinfect your tools? So coming towards the end now, if you could say, as like I say, a lot of yard owners tend to shy away from biosecurity, I think because they think it sounds expensive or it sounds like it's hassle. But really it's just building it into your daily routine. What would you say if there was a yard that had no biosecurity? What are the absolute simplest but most effective steps that they could add into their routine that would go at least some way towards protecting them?
Temperature taking has got to be top of the list. New horses that are going away to, say, camps or stay away shows or traveling and competing abroad, you know, take the temperatures. And again, I'll get a bit of an eye roll on a busy competition yard. Well, my horse is away every 3 weeks. I'd be taking temperatures all season. Well, you'll be taking temperatures all season then, quite frankly. You know, it's 2 minutes a day, record the temperature. You know, that's going to stop you. If you get an infectious disease outbreak, you know, it's expensive. Emotionally, it's so hard. Physically, it's a lot more work. Never mind the fact that you might have very poorly horses that are going to really affect your business. For the sake of taking temperatures, you know, again, ideally it should be twice a day. But what we're trying to get through to yards at the moment is, if you can do it once a day, we know that we have 3 days before they become infectious. So if you've taken it on Friday and it was fine, but you take it on Saturday and it's not fine, then you backtrack, you've lost one of your 24 hours. So you've now got 2 days to do something about it. Yeah. And we have had some of the bigger yards implement this, and actually they are finding that they can do it. You know, it's just a mindset a little bit of getting started and then recording it. A lot of the apps now, you know, you can put the temperature straight on the app and then everybody has access to them. Yeah, I mean, if you're competing abroad, if you're staying away, or if you've got a new arrival, the biggest single thing you can do is take temperatures alongside vaccinations, obviously.
Yeah, as Julie just said, it takes no time at all to do temp testing. It's a very quick process. And if you have something even on your phone or a sheet of paper to note it down, then it's very easy to know if there's a change that's taken place, you know, so that you can take further precautions. Last thing, so if you have a yard owner that doesn't know what to do about their biosecurity and wants to find out how they could put a policy in place, the steps that they could take for their yard, do you just want to explain a bit about the services that you provide and how you can help yards develop their biosecurity practices?
Yes, certainly. If they pop us a message, we've got a good website. They can email us, WhatsApp me, however they want to make contact, pick up the phone and ring. And then we would come out and have a little look round. Again, we work very much within what is practical for you. We look at the layout, we look at the type of horses you've got on the yard, the type of clients you've got on the yard, and we work within the restrictions that you have in place. You know, your building layout might not be ideal, but we can work with it. We can always work with it. And we can go away and write you a policy if you don't have one already. If you've got a policy, then we can tweak it to make sure that it is relevant to your yard. And very probably from the ones that we've been doing, we're going to be implementing new things as well. But all these things are open for discussion because, as I've said before, I can give you a best case scenario that might not be practical in all sorts of ways for you. So we need to work out what works for you, and that way we are reducing your risk and, like I say, build relationships and then improve on that over time.
Yeah, that's good. I definitely think it's something that every yard owner should have in the back of their mind, and it's definitely spreading the word of biosecurity, and hopefully things like this will help people have a better understanding. I think we've done a really good job this evening of covering the basics of biosecurity and some. And does anybody have any questions? If nobody has any questions, then we will let you all go. As I said, SEIB will send out a follow-up email, which will point to the resources and the website for Gail and what she's got on the Ag Plus website, and I can point out to the resources that we've got on the hub as well. We've got some people typing. It's very exciting that it shows you that. It's like waiting for who's going to finish their message first. Beth said, how much do you charge to come out and do a biosecurity review? I guess that's pretty much case by case basis, is it, Gail?
It is a little bit. It depends on distance. You know, we will have to charge some travel, and it depends whether you want just a basic walk and talk that I can do a follow-up email and give you some guidelines, or whether you actually want us to write you a policy. And the best thing to do is to get in touch, discuss your requirements, and we can go from there. It's not as expensive as you think it might be. You know, it's certainly doable. Certainly if you look at cost over the year and per client, it's very reasonable. But yeah, it's that sort of pin a tail on a donkey, that one.
Well, I'll make sure that Georgina puts your email in, and then obviously anyone can get in contact with you if they want to find out about you going out and seeing them. But otherwise, thank you, Gail.